When vampires and sinners speak with Irish accents, it's not just a stylistic. It carries all the weight of history and centuries of oppression, displacement, erasure, and survival, woven into their very voice. It's a decision that pushes the horror beyond fangs and blood, rooting it in cultural trauma. And once you hear that accent, once you understand what it evokes, the vampires stop being just monsters. They become haunted legacies. In the film, the master vampire, Remmick, is introduced as an ancient Irish immigrant, one who claims to empathize with the suffering he sees among Black Americans in the 1930s Mississippi. On the surface, that might sound like a bizarre choice, a white European vampire terrorizing Black communities. But the choice is so deliberate because the Irish themselves were once positioned as racially and culturally inferior when Britain colonized their land for centuries. In specific, long before the film's setting, the Irish endured systemic subjugation, economic exploitation, religious suppression, cultural erasure, for hundreds of years under colonial rule. In a sense, the Irish once occupied a social position closer to what oppressed Black Americans experienced later. Marginalized, dehumanized, othered. By making the vampire Irish, the film gives him a backstory defined not by nobility or aristocracy, but by victimhood, forced exile, and a desire to reclaim identity. That shared history of being treated as lesser, whether through colonization or racial caste systems, creates a bridge. The vampires aren't exotic aristocrats. They're descendants of a people who once suffered the same type of systemic cruelty. That link deepens the horror and the metaphor. Vampirism becomes a symbol of cultural violence, of stealing identity, of exploiting people who've already known what it means to be victimized. Then there is the painful resonance of assimilation as survival. For many Irish immigrants to America, survival meant assimilation, adopting new norms, blending in, distancing from their heritage. Sometimes at the cost of dignity and solidarity with other marginalized groups. In Sinner's Basher, Remmick mirrors that. He promises freedom to Black communities who embrace his vampiric fellowship, offering escape from the violence of the day. But that escape demands surrender, not just of flesh, but of culture, identity, and autonomy. It's a twisted version of what many oppressed peoples have faced when assimilation is presented as the only route to survival. Join us, abandon your roots, and maybe you'll be safe. But history shows how empty that promise often becomes. In the film's vampire metaphor, the promise is even starker. Immortality, but at the cost of humanity. What's remarkable is how the film doesn't shy away from the complexity of this metaphor. It's not painting Irish history and Black history as identical. It knows they're different in magnitude, legacy, context, but it draws attention to how oppression, forced displacement, cultural erasure, and systemic violence have woven patterns across different peoples. In doing so, the movie invites us to reflect on how one group's escape from historical trauma can turn into another's nightmare when power and race dynamics shift. There's also the way Irish cultural expression, its music, its folktales, its songs, becomes a haunting echo in the film. Director Ryan Coogler has spoken directly about his interest in blending Irish folk traditions with the Black musical roots that define the story's juke joint backdrop. That musical crossover becomes literal in the vampire's songs and dance. But it's not a celebration of cultural fusion. Instead, it's a warning. Appropriation and assimilation under the guise of unity often carry exploitation and erasure in their wake. In that sense, the vampires embody something far more insidious than a nightly predator. They are the living echo of colonization, of displacement, of cultural theft. Bloodlust is just the surface. Underneath is a thirst for identity erased, for power gained by destruction, for heritage stolen and sold back as a twisted gift. What happens when trauma survives? When history is carried across centuries by those who refuse to forget? In Sinners, vampirism becomes that survival, eternal life built on endless hunger. But that hunger demands others suffer. That sorrow demands new victims, and that twist feels painfully familiar. It echoes too many stories where oppressed people, once given power, replicate the same hierarchies that once oppressed them. Because they have learned to survive through dominance, through control, through erasure of others to mask their own pain. That's why making the vampires Irish isn't just a creative quirk in Sinners. It's a statement, it's a mirror, it's a challenge. It asks us to look beyond skin color, beyond fangs and fantasy, and ask, where does evil come from? From blood? From race? Or from systems built on exploitation?